Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session on sales enablement. I know that by now you have turned in your assignment on sales enablement. Hopefully, you've also seen the presentation that I've made about inbound marketing and content marketing, as well as on marketing automation. So this is my take on sales enablement, and hopefully I'm going to build on what you have already worked on in your assignment. So you should have understood by now that sales enablement is how can marketing help the sales organization onboard faster. That is, how can I get new salespeople coming on inside? How can I make sure that they're going to make sure that they are worthy of going in and talking to the customers as soon as possible. But then how do I do it is by providing them with the right kind of tools, with the right kind of training, the right kind of calculators at their fingertips, so that when they go and talk to the customers, they're able to close the deals much faster. So sales enablement is how can I help my salespeople initially, even in the onboarding process, but also as they progress and do their sales calls with their customers. So if you take a look at sales enablement, and I guess this is something that you must have already seen when you did your research, the idea is to actually provide your sales organization with the right information so that I can go out there, create value for my customers, and then make the sale. But if you go out there, and I'm sure that a lot of you, and I also saw this in your assignments, is that different people talk about sales enablement in different ways. Some people talk about sales enablement as training. Some people think of it as tools. Some people talk about how in order for sales enablement to work, that sales and marketing need to be aligned so that marketing has the right kind of content that can then be used by salespeople in the sales process. But for all this to work, you need to have a very clear idea about what kind of customers do I want to target, what kind of sales strategies do I want to have. Do I want to have key accounts? Do I want to work with customers? So essentially, if you take a look at inbound marketing, how would I deal with simple customers as against more complicated customers? And if I do all this, it's about sales metrics. And if you take a look at what sales enablement is, it's a little bit of everything. So depending upon how you answered, this is what I was looking for. If you had a little bit of everything, that is what I was looking for in your papers. Right? So if you take a look at how do you define sales enablement, it's the process of providing the sales organization with the information, the content and the tools that help salespeople sell more effectively. Again, remember that one of the things we see happening more and more is the fact that we saw that there are close to 5.4 or 6.8 people in the customer's buying decision process. And if that is the case, what we are looking at is that salespeople now have to deal with multiple people in the customer's organization, which makes it harder for them to stop every time a new person comes into the buying decision and then try to adapt their sales pitch according to that. And different customers means different needs. So we have to look at different ways by which salespeople need help in selling to the customers as well. Similarly, when you have a new salesperson joining a sales organization, it might take them quite some time to actually be out there, go out into the market and be productive. So any tool that we can do to help salespeople do this is something that is seen as sales enablement. Right? And as you can see, that the foundation of this is to make sure that salespeople get what they have and get what the company can provide them so that they can engage with the customer. The buyer here is just not one person, but multiple people in the buyer's organization. And again, you also need to make sure that your buyers are going to go through different phases. So by now, you know that there are different steps in the buying process. So in different steps in the buying process, you need to understand that there are different people who will be engaged in the buying process. So you need to be understanding of that part and then go out there and make sure that your salespeople have the right tools to be able to communicate to the right customers at the right point in the customer's buying process. Right? So if you take a look at it, essentially what it boils down to is the fact is that how can I help my salespeople think more in terms of the buyer? And how can I make sure that the salespeople have the right kind of arguments that will convince the buyer to actually go ahead and buy from me, which means that can I make more sales by talking the language of the buyer? Right? So now that begs the question, why are we doing and talking about sales enablement? Right? And what you see is the fact is that, as I said, that in the past, not all buyers are the same. So you have different kind of buyers in an organization. So you have the technical buyer, then you have the value buyer, the focusing on cost, then you have the person who's focusing a lot more on the risk part. You have the economic buyer who's looking at cost. So you have different profiles of people in the customer's organization, and you cannot have the same content to try and approach every one of them. And what you also then realize is that if that is the case, what can salespeople do? Who can salespeople rely upon to get that job done? And what you'll see increasingly is that marketing can actually do the job of trying to understand what is happening in the market, what are the different personas. Hopefully you have done work on inbound marketing in the assignment where you looked at persona driven marketing. So essentially, if marketing is developing those personas, can salespeople use that and then go out there and be much more successful in what they do? And what you also see is that there is more and more research that says that without the help of these kind of tools, with the customers becoming more demanding, salespeople are becoming less and less productive. So which means that they need the help to be out there and be much more productive in their jobs. Productive here means bringing in more revenue, but you also need to make sure that we can increasingly also decrease the cost. That is, we bring in more revenue, but we don't spend so much money bringing that revenue in. And of course, what you also see is that increasingly marketing is taking on a sales quota. So essentially, what you see is that marketing is becoming more and more responsible for even bringing in the sale. So which means that marketing and sales need to start getting better aligned. And if that is the case, if marketing is going to be measured, they're going to push the salespeople to be much more effective in what they do. So everything gets measured. So you see that sales enablement is going to rely on marketing. And if marketing is going to be measured, they're going to push the salespeople to be out there being more productive so that even marketing can be seen as being effective in an organization, right? So the question then becomes, how can sales enablement help? And you see that one of the things you can actually do is that because there are many people involved in the customer's decision-making process, you can make sure that sales teams have the right content when they're going to talk to the buyers. Additionally, what you can also see is that you could be talking to a buyer who is in the early stage of the decision-making process where they're just looking for information that is very specific. And then when the buyer progresses in their needs analysis, they may be needing more specific information. So if I can understand what are the customers looking for in different stages of the buying process, then sales enablement can help provide the right kind of messaging to the customers in the right part of the buying cycle. The other aspect, of course, as you must have guessed by now when you took a look at some of the options available for sales enablement, is you can provide many ways of content to the customers. You can send them white papers, you can send them emails, you can show them calculators, you can show them videos. So there are many ways by which salespeople can actually present content to the customers, including customized PowerPoint presentations, which can be customized according to the customer and according to the person you're talking to in the customer's organization. And of course, when you're doing this, when you're sending these information to the customers, when you're showing this to the customers, you can directly see whether the customers are engaged rather than typical marketing collateral where you hope that the customers visit your website and see your stuff. Whereas with sales enablement, you can actually gauge whether the customers are engaged or not. Now, one of the things which I missed in some of your assignments is this part about onboarding. So what you will also see is that sales enablement is as much about onboarding your employees. That is, assuming that you have a new employee joining your organization, how can sales enablement tools help in terms of making sure that salespeople get the necessary training early when they join the company, but also with terms of what you would normally look at in terms of 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. That is, within 30 days, how much knowledge can we share with our salespeople? Within 60 days, how much can they retain? And within 90 days, how much can they actually go out there and start using with their customers? And this can be used to measure the training progress of how sales enablement is helping the onboarding of salespeople so that they can become productive members of the workforce very fast. So if you go in then, so what are the essential components of a holistic sales enablement system? It all begins with, in my opinion, while we look at people, content, process, and technology, it is very obvious, as you will see, that in every aspect, everything begins with a process. Is what is the process we are going to be looking at? What kind of cases are we going to be using with what kind of customers, with what kind of people in the customer's decision making process? And if I get that process right, I can then work on making sure that I know what kind of people do I have, who is going to be responsible for coming up with the content that is then going to be used in the sales process, who is going to be responsible for creating the content, who's going to be responsible for using the content. And that is something where you have the people coming in. And then, of course, the content itself. So what kind of content do we want? Do we want videos? Do we want white papers? Do we want customer testimonials? Do we want tools? So all of these are different parts of the content. And finally, we can then start talking about what kind of technologies do we want to use to support this. And one of the assignment topics I had for all of you was go take a look at a bunch of companies that are offering these kinds of tools, and all of you did a very good job of trying to take a look at what kind of tools are available when it comes to sales enablement. But understand that tools are and technology is the last part of the big picture. The big picture really has to be about understanding exactly what is the process that we're going to be helping the salespeople with. What kind of roles, who's going to be responsible for making certain things, what is a salesperson going to be responsible for, what is the marketing team going to be responsible for, then what kind of content do we want marketing to create, and what kind of content do we want salespeople to present to the customers. And then if we do all this, then we start thinking about what kind of technology is going to help us do that. So this is something that some of you have not necessarily mentioned, but if you take a look at what is happening in the world of sales enablement today and how do people think of sales enablement and how they look at it, this is research from a company called CSO Insights, stands for Chief Sales Officer Insights, and every year they conduct current trends in sales research. And essentially what they did was they asked a bunch of senior sales leaders about what they think about sales enablement and how do they envision this for the salespeople. And you'll see invariably that sales enablement is seen as something that will help in the sales training process. So 69% of the people who took this survey thought that sales enablement was about sales training. Around 61% talked about how sales enablement can be used as a kind of a tool to help salespeople sell better. A lot of people looked at how sales enablement can help the sales process become much more efficient. But you'll also see that close to 52% or 51% of the people talk about sales onboarding. And this is something that a lot of you did not necessarily talk about in an assignment, the importance of sales onboarding. Now, the rest of the things in terms of content, services, all of it makes sense, but you'll see that predominantly the top 4 is about helping the salespeople by providing them the right kind of training, by giving them the right tools so that they can be better in their sales process. And then, of course, the idea is that if you have new people starting, how quickly can we onboard them? And then, of course, to a lesser extent, it is important about what kind of content is relevant for the salespeople as well. So essentially, what are some sales enablement tools? If you take a look at companies, for example, there's a company out of Indy called Lessonly. If you take a look at Lessonly, one of the things they do is that they help salespeople onboard very fast by learning from each other. So imagine a tool where I can go out there and record a sales pitch about how I would be talking to a customer, and then I could record it, and then I can either show it to my manager or I can show it to my colleagues who can then comment on it, and then at which point in time I can improve my process. And that's also part of the sales enablement space. I can also take a look at using these kind of tools as shown here to see how I can talk about value creation for the customers, and I can do things like ROI calculators, return on investment calculators, where I can actually go out there and tell the customer for every investment that they do in buying your product, what are they going to get and how quick is the payback period going to be. But of course, last but not the least, one of the most important tools that people think of when we think about sales enablement is about stories. How can I bring the stories to customers about other similar kind of customers that have seen value from you selling your solution? And this kind of storytelling can be enabled because of these kind of sales enablement practices as well. But if all that is true, you must have possibly seen, some of you must have possibly seen that sales enablement gets a lot of flack, mostly because of the fact that sales enablement requires your marketing and salespeople to work together. But unfortunately, what is happening is, as of February 2016, is that only 9% of the people say that marketing content gets used more than 5 times, which means that if marketing is creating a specific content and spending a lot of money on it, but if salespeople are not using it, so essentially what we're talking about is that all that marketing spend is going to go waste. But what you also need to understand is that if salespeople aren't using what marketing has spent so much money on, so probably salespeople are recreating their own stories at own cost, which makes it a lot more harder for them in the sales job. And that is something that you will have to think about when you take a look at marketing content not getting used, and that happens when sales and marketing always do not see eye to eye, right? And you also see that when you take a look at sales enablement, there are at least different storage repositories, which means that salespeople find it very, very hard to actually go and find out which one should I be using when I go and talk to my salespeople. So essentially, a lot of companies, unfortunately, do not centralize all of their information gathering and sharing and value creation tools to be used with the customers. And that again means that it's going to have a lot of issues in terms of getting used. And you see that, as I said, if 9% of the people say that they only use it 5 times, it also means that salespeople are creating a lot of content, which is technically taking time away from their normal sales process, which is again something that you need to keep in mind, because if salespeople are spending way too much time on creating content that marketing has already created, is that an efficient use of their time? So that is something that you really need to be thinking about, is if marketing is creating this content, and why is it that salespeople are not using it and using something else? So you see that finally 90% of marketing content does not get used. So which is again a waste of time, because if marketing is spending all that money developing that content, you should also understand that marketing uses up resources which could have been given to salespeople, so that either in terms of salary increases to the salespeople, but if that is not happening, if marketing is spending all that money and if salespeople are not using it, so sales enablement unfortunately goes a waste. So which brings the question, why do most sales enablement initiatives fail? And it's probably because, first of all, there's no very clear strategy about what sales enablement is supposed to be doing. So you really need to be having a sales enablement strategy in place before you can start talking about why it fails or what is going to be successful. And if my strategy is going to be in place, then I need to make sure that I have the right kind of processes to make sure that marketing and sales talk to each other. And if they talk to each other, are the processes aligned in such a way that the strategies can be implemented properly? And if that is the case, can the processes lead to salespeople and marketing people working together to create the right kind of tools? And these tools, is it easy for the salespeople to find them? And are the tools relevant for them to be able to sell much more efficiently? And if I can do all this, it should lead to increased efficiencies that we have. But unfortunately, lack of strategy means there's no clear processes, which means there are no clear tools created. And then when that happens, you're not necessarily going to have the right kind of success. So one of the things that we talk about is, for sales enablement to be very successful in how we actually do this, you need to make sure that there is good collaboration between marketing and sales, that marketing and sales talk to each other, share insights, talk about what is happening in the customer's organization, and then share it with marketing so that marketing can then compare the stories across different salespeople, do their market research, and then come up with the right kind of story that salespeople find it easier, because these stories were created based on feedback that they gave. Right? So if marketing does a good job, then based on input from sales, then marketing can create the right kind of information, which is what they're responsible for. And if they do that, they can actually help train the salespeople to use the right kind of tools, to use the right kind of message at the right time with the right customer. And if you can do this, then what you can see is that your sales management comes into play, where you can actually put your sales enablement initiatives into continuous use, and most importantly into continuous process of improvement, where you learn from the mistakes in your implementation and make sure that you don't repeat the same. So, which brings us to some of the last points about how do we measure sales enablement success. And there's a very nice statement from Gartner, which I would like to read out. It says, when it comes to sales enablement, there is no single metric that can measure the results of your effort. But while measurement may be hard, it's not impossible. So we need to be measuring what sales enablement is doing. And here are some key metrics that I saw some of you mention, but here are just some examples of what you might want to take a look at. For example, if I'm looking at onboarding and training and sales enablement as part of training, you can see how many people attend it and how much better do they get from it. Are they comprehending what is being taught? You can also take a look at ramp up time, which is part of onboarding. That is, how long does it take for new salespeople who have joined it, go through the sales enablement programs, and then become much more productive on the job. We can also take a look at how much content that is created by marketing is being used by salespeople, and especially you can take a look at attribution reports. You can connect how many times the salespeople have used different kind of contents, and has it led to faster sales cycle times? Has it led to bigger size of the orders? And that's something you can definitely try and make a connection between the content used and then how it has an impact on what the outcomes are. You can also take a look at sales enablement metrics in terms of lead to conversion rate. That is, how long does it take for a lead to actually become an actual customer. Of course, it also depends upon other aspects like, how many leads does a salesperson have. So if the salesperson has too many leads, it might be difficult for them to control it because they may not have the time to follow up in it. If they don't have good quality leads, they might also have to spend more time. But if I can keep this under control, I can use lead to conversion rate as a good indication of whether enablement is working or not. You can also look at win-loss ratio. So essentially, how are my salespeople doing in terms of winning customers as against losing with respect to the competition? You can also take a look at whether your salespeople are happy with the content that is provided. So NPS stands for the Net Promoter Score. So Net Promoter Score, you might have seen, would be like a 10-point scale that says, how likely are you to recommend this particular tool to others? So we can use sales enablement success based on whether salespeople are happy with the tools provided to them. Sales enablement, another way, is actually seeing whether salespeople are increasing their selling time, which means that can we provide them with the right kind of tools so that they don't have to worry about a lot of administrative work, and any time spent in front of the customers actually selling is actually going to be much more effective for them. You can also take a look at how many, if I'm a sales manager, I'm interested in seeing whether the sales enablement initiatives that I'm running is successful or not. I can also take a look at how many of my reps are meeting their quotas. And if they are not meeting their quotas, is it got anything to do with why they are not using their sales enablement tools? And of course, the last is that if I can reduce my sales cycle time because I'm using better sales enablement tools, then that's a very, very good measure of what is happening in terms of sales enablement. So this is in a nutshell what sales enablement is, what are the different components of it, and of course, how do you measure the success of it as well. Now, you should take this presentation that I have together with what you've done in your homework, and you will get a complete picture of what sales enablement is. And once you have your presentation, my presentation, as well as the presentation from Showpad that I had posted, you get a complete view on the concept of how sales enablement is helping in the sales process. Thank you for your attention.